speaking out.
I was the voice for the black community.
Loud and proud.
I did not see it as being courageous. None of us did. But we saw it out of necessity.
Actions from African Americans.
And it just compels me to do some of that to create a better future for the people I encountered.
Clearing the path for change.
I became the first of many black women that did things.
And showing resilience.
Black culture has complexity, it has adversity, yet triumph.
WVTM 13 presents Project Community, Black Voices of Alabama.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Guy Rawlings.
And I'm Carla Wade. Over the next hour, we will highlight important black voices in our state that have played a role in shaping our country.
From the classroom to the racetrack, people of color have been using their voices, pushing for change. We start with a man the New York Times dubbed as America's Mandela. Bryan Stevenson devotes his career to changing the inequity in the criminal justice system in Alabama and nationwide.
And through the Equal Justice Initiative based in Montgomery, the widely acclaimed attorney represents those that are unfairly treated by offering free legal services. WVTM 13's Bria Douglas sat down with him to talk about his humble beginnings, how his journey became a Hollywood movie, and his thoughts on the current debate over more prisons in Alabama.
Before his life hit the big screen.
You the lawyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Bryan Stevenson spent decades behind the scenes, quietly giving back to others.
We are sitting in the Equal Justice Initiative, an organization you started in 1989. But before all of this came to be, what inspired your drive and your passion for criminal justice reform, helping people who are underserved, living in poor black communities?
I'm a product of the civil rights movement. I'm a product of Brown versus Board of Education. I grew up in a community where black kids couldn't go to public schools, and lawyers came into our community and made them open up those public institutions, which changed the opportunities that I had. And so I knew that practicing law would create opportunities to help other people, to help other disfavored people, marginalized people, people like me.
You grew up in a poor part of Delaware. You went on to get your law degree from Harvard. You could be making tons of money representing these high-profile clients, and yet you have devoted your life to really representing people who can do nothing for you in return. Was there ever a point in your career where you thought about practicing a different kind of law?
No, not really. I mean, for me, it has always been a privilege to help people who are in need. The idea that I might be able to do something that could help someone, could save someone's life, for me has always been really compelling. I had, law school debts and all of those things that a lot of people had to deal with. And I just had this belief that if I did what was important, what was right, all of that, would work out.
Stevenson writes about his life's work in his New York Times best-selling book, Just Mercy. In 2019, his story became a movie with the same name, starring Michael B. Jordan portraying him.
But I thought it was actually pretty accurate, and I appreciated that. I was very, very thrilled and excited and impressed and loved everything about Michael B. Jordan's performance. And the one thing I told him he didn't have to get exactly right was, I said, you don't have to lose your Creed body when you play me. I don't think I will have any objections to you kind of looking like that when you play me. You can go with the Black Panther look when you play me.
WVTM 13 was there in 2015 as Stevenson walked out of jail with his client Anthony Ray Hinton after spending decades behind bars for 2 murders in Birmingham he didn't commit. The moment serves as the final scene of the 2019 movie.
What is that feeling like when you are watching this man see his family again outside for the first time in, I think it was almost 30 years, and knowing you helped give him his freedom back? What is that feeling like for you?
It's priceless. I mean, it's what, if you do the kind of work I do, it's what you dream about, is to create opportunities for your clients to be free when they've been wrongly convicted.
As As the Equal Justice Initiative fights to end mass incarceration and wrongful convictions, the state is pushing to spend federal COVID-19 relief funds for more prisons. Its spending, Governor Kay Ivey says, will help improve Alabama's criminal justice system.
Addressing these challenges through the construction of new prison facilities is the legal and physically sound thing for us to do. And it's also morally the right thing to do.
Stevenson disagrees.
I don't think we need more prisons. I think we need fewer people in prison who are not a threat to public safety. The prison population in Alabama was about 5,000 in the late 1970s. It's now over 25,000. That fivefold increase doesn't reflect a fivefold increase in crime. It reflects this investment in extreme sentences for a host of crimes. I've represented people in this state who were sentenced to life without parole for stealing a bicycle, for writing a bad check of less than $300, for simple possession of drugs. And those kinds of offenses should not turn into 50 and 60-year prison sentences.
More of Bria's discussion with Bryan Stevenson in just a little bit, including how criminal justice reform doesn't stop with courtrooms and prisons, but all the way to the voting booth.
The deaths of 4 Birmingham girls galvanized a nation. The horrific bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church also broke down barriers. WVTM 13's John Papke shares the story of one of the girls' classmates who says that the tragedy opened doors of opportunity for a generation.
She was probably the most popular student in our whole grade.
Carol Smitherman's memories of her Center Street Elementary classmate Denise McNair are crystal clear, like every detail of their last meeting on Friday, September 13th, 1963.
Denise and I were sitting on the playground. She said, "Well, you gonna come to Youth Day?" I said, "Girl, yeah, I'm gonna be there."
McNair wanted Smitherman to attend Youth Day at 16th Street Baptist Church 2 days later, but Smitherman's mom refused.
I just was angry with her. The entire weekend, kept asking, could I go, could I go, could I go? She said, no, we're going to our church.
Then at 10:24 that Sunday morning, a huge rumble rippled through their church, Westminster Presbyterian. Almost 3 miles away, the 16th Street Baptist Church had been bombed.
It was loud. And then just as the bomb exploded and the men looked at each other, they jumped up and they left out.
Debris was everywhere, and word spread fast that 4 girls did not survive the blast. Smitherman's 5th grade friend, Denise McNair, was one of them.
And I was like, no, that can't be true. I'm supposed to be there. I should be in the bathroom with her. We'd have been talking about boys, and what about Monday?
Of course, the death of Denise McNair and the other 3 girls sent shockwaves throughout Birmingham and around the world. And Smitherman believes their sacrifice ultimately paved the way for opportunities for her and so many others.
So you would have been in the bathroom. If you had come, you probably would have been with her.
I would have. Okay. She invited me.
After losing her classmate on that fateful day, Smitherman grew frustrated with the lack of arrests in the case.
That's when I decided early that I wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to solve what happened to my friend.
So she earned a law degree and became the first African-American female deputy district attorney in Jefferson County. In fact, she worked in the DA's office when Denise's bombers were eventually brought to justice.
I became the first of many black women that did things. The doors were open, and so I walked in.
And continues blazing trails today. The Titusville native is currently serving as a circuit judge in Jefferson County. John Papke, WVTM 13.
Well, this month we lost a champion of justice, Maxine McNair. She was the last living parent of one of the 4 girls that was killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. Her daughter was 11-year-old Denise McNair, the youngest of the victims. Maxine McNair taught in Birmingham public schools for 33 years, and she was the matriarch of social justice in Birmingham until she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She was 93 years old.
Randall Woodfin, William Bell, Larry Langford, and Bernard Cade, all part of a very exclusive club. They are or were mayors of the city of Birmingham, all of them African American, and they have one man to thank.
Most folk don't even know who I am anymore.
If you're of a certain age, the face should look familiar. Otherwise, if you're a resident of Birmingham, you should recognize the name.
Some people remember Arrington because they have to drive on Arrington Boulevard, and that's usually it.
Richard Arrington, or Dr. Arrington, or former Mayor Arrington.
I like to be called Dick Arrington. Dick Arrington, folk who know me. Yeah. In some of the places.
Previously one of the most well-known names in Birmingham, the city's longest running and first black mayor, a reluctant legend.
Well, I grew up at a time, first of all, when there were no black elected officials. I grew up in a very racially segregated city and state in Alabama. If I had said I was going to want to be mayor one day, my friends would have probably thought the worst of me and something wrong with them. So I just didn't have that dream. I grew up wanting to be a scientist and a teacher.
And he did just that. Arrington attended Miles College, graduated, and went on to earn other degrees at other major colleges. Returned to Miles and worked his way up to Dean of the College of Science.
8 historically black colleges, 4-year black colleges in Alabama, under a Ford Foundation grant, set up a consortium for the colleges to cooperate. And they hired me as the executive director.
That lasted a little over a year before some Miles students urged Arrington to run for city council. This was 1971, and at the time, Birmingham only had one African American in elected office. Arrington won and made the most of it.
Once I was on the council, I was the voice for the black community, every affirmative action program, all of the police reform, all of that. People finally fell in love with me because of that, the black community did.
He calls his election and those of other blacks in cities across the country the fruit of the civil rights movement. It sparked urban renewal. The city of Birmingham itself doubled in size, doubling its tax base.
When I was elected, it was a 60 square mile city. When I left, it was 130 square miles. We had a tax base that they still live off of today. We created a record number of jobs, so we reduced crime. We did some positive things.
Even then, Arrington had little interest in becoming mayor. He used his city council seat to fight institutional inequities and police mistreatment of blacks.
Many of them were blacks who were arrested for doing something they shouldn't have been doing. But there was a policy there of officers arresting these people, handcuffing them, taking them somewhere, beating hell out of them, and then putting them in jail.
One such instance was the case of Benita Carter. In 1979, Officer George Sands shot the 20-year-old 4 times, killing her for a crime she didn't commit, igniting riots across the city. Local black ministers called for Sands to be fired from the force, but the current mayor and great friend to Arrington, David Vann, refused.
We had served on the city council together, and he was, by Birmingham standards, pretty liberal. So I had helped him to get elected. I had spoken with him even about this guy Sands, and he had promised me he was going to move Sands to a different precinct. I said, move into a white precinct, because in this black precinct, he's creating all kind of problems. And David said, fine, I'll do it. And that was David's undoing.
The aforementioned ministers, they weren't satisfied with a transfer. If Sands wouldn't lose his job, Vann would lose his.
So they've already decided, you know, we're going to run a black. And Arrington, you hit. We've been backing you. And get ready. So I was drafted.
He ran and won and won and won some more. The city's first black mayor lasted 20 years, the bridge between Birmingham's ugly past and a more beautiful future. But one problem Arrington faced then still plagues the city today.
The biggest problem that we have in Birmingham is that we have about 30 or 40 cities around Jefferson County. All of them got a mayor. Everybody's got a fire department. Everybody's got there's a lot of repetition, a lot of competition. It has really retarded our growth.
He retired in 1999 and went back to his dream job, teaching. First at UAB, then Alabama State, and now back home at Miles College.
87, almost 88 years old. I don't have anything to do. And so they're good enough to have me to teach a couple of classes. They give me one honors class, which is always good because they teach me.
Arrington's election in 1979 had an international impact. One woman from Denmark, Copenhagen, Denmark, told him if Birmingham, Alabama can have a black mayor, there's hope for the world, and that's what he ended up naming his memoir.
Wow, what an incredible legacy there. Well, still ahead, we're going to head to Wilcox County, where one woman's passion to teach helped educate black children across the state.
Plus sharing Birmingham's story in person.
The physical surroundings represent what the history is about.
how a grant is helping preserve Birmingham's physical history to present to the world.
More Project Community, Black Voices of Alabama, after the break. And when it comes to civil rights history, everyone knows about the difference that Rosa Parks made by simply sitting down on a city bus. But decades before that act of civil disobedience, another Rosa in Alabama was working to better the lives of young black children. But you may not know the story of Rosa Young, the first Rosa.
Born in 1890 in the Wilcox County town of Rosebud, Alabama, Rosa Young was the fourth of 10 children. Separated from slavery by only one generation, she taught herself to read, then taught her siblings. She soon realized that was her gift and her calling.
By the time she was 10, she knew she wanted to teach her people. So in 1900 in rural Alabama, there were no schools for blacks, and she saw that nobody was learning anything, and she just knew that that was her heart and desire, that everyone come to learn, that that was the way you were going to improve your life.
So Young went to college, became a teacher, and opened a private school for black children in Rosebud. In just 2 years, the Rosebud Literary and Industrial School went from 7 students to more than 200. But when the boll weevil decimated the area's cotton crop, money dried up. The school was days away from shutting down when the Lutheran Church stepped in to help. Together with church leaders, Young went on to open 30 schools and churches all across Alabama, like this one still standing. Christine Wirch wrote a children's book about Young after learning of the education pioneer.
She had this passion and vision that one person alone couldn't do, and yet she did it with God's help. And that story about what one person can do to change lives and how God motivated her to do everything she did and spread it everywhere, way beyond what a child from Rosebud, Alabama would ever expect. It's just a phenomenal story.
The Lutheran Church made a documentary about the educator and spiritual leader, written from Young's own autobiography.
To serve is regarded as a divine privilege, as well as a duty of every right-minded man.
Rosa Young passed away in 1971, but through her 81 years of life, she impacted thousands of lives and seeded 35 churches in Alabama. Betty Anderson and her siblings went to one of the schools Young started. The tuition was 25 cents a month then. She started a museum in Camden to honor the Wilcox County native.
Well, here I tried to set the room up almost like the way she had her classroom set up. That's a picture of Rosa Young. Everyone in her school had a piano in it. And this desk here is from one of the original desks from the school in Rosebud.
In 1961, the same year Young retired, she was awarded an honorary doctorate by Concordia Theological Seminary. Many say her lifetime of work in Alabama caused a theological shift in the state, educating minds and growing the Lutheran Church.
I have a lot of people come in that never knew about her, and I have a lot of people come in that knew about her, but they didn't know about the museum. And they say, oh, I know about this, I know about that. You know, I said, why? They say, I'm Lutheran.
We have the largest Black Lutheran number of pastors in the United States, mostly because of her.
A woman who may not be widely known, but whose impact has been widely felt.
Lisa Crane reporting. Well, sometimes it's not just a person that tells a story. It's a landmark, a location so significant it has a story of its own.
Well, nearly $1 million has been set aside to help Birmingham's historic district finish work ahead of the World Games this summer. WVTM 13's Magdala Lusant takes us on a tour of some of the work being done.
Birmingham has history deeply rooted in the civil rights movement. It starts right here at the historic Bethel Baptist Church, formerly led by pastor and civil rights leader Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth.
He was the one that marched to try to get the buses integrated here. He was the one that was one of the speakers on the March on Washington. He was the one that invited Dr. King.
Pastor Thomas Wilder has spent the last 33 years leading Bethel Baptist Church in Collegeville. Over the years, church members have spent millions to keep the building and the surrounding neighborhood it sits in alive.
We've been working on trying to get the parsonage restored, trying to get a parking pad so that people won't have to walk so far.
This summer, thousands from across the globe are expected to be in Birmingham for the World Games. Wilder wants to be ready for anyone wanting to learn more about the church's history.
And it would be a travesty if we did not do all that we could to make sure that, first, that history is known, but also that the physical surroundings represent what the history is about.
Important stories Jefferson County commissioners felt needed some financial help to tell. A $936,000 grant will help some of Birmingham's historic districts finish out some projects they've had on paper for years. Bethel's share is $150,000 to build a visitor center at a nearby property.
We were looking at trying to use the church funds initially, or trying to take out a loan, whichever we could, to get it done, but this grant helps us so that we won't have to go to those measures.
All eyes won't just be on Bethel Baptist Church, but also the 16th Street Baptist Church and the Carver Theater, which is ready to let people in right now if it could.
You have a great new theater, but it's not fully functional.
Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame Vice President Orville Eiffel says over $5 million has been spent already to get the theater up to date.
A few months ago, we brought some of the jazz artists and some of the inductees in here to take a look at the building. They couldn't believe it. This is not the same old Carver Theater used to be.
A $125,000 will give it the boost it needs to buy chairs, tables, a piano, and more.
It's to help purchase money for the radio station as well. It's going to help buy new equipment for the radio station.
Not too far down the road is the century-old parsonage next to the 16th Street Baptist Church, currently under construction.
1909, in the newspaper clippings.
You said found in between the walls?
Yes.
Board of Trustees Chairman Ted Debro says the $75,000 they got will restore the original windows of the 1911 home, where well-known civil rights leaders stopped by.
Meetings are held here. You're standing in the former dining room. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. ate here with the families.
In addition, it will serve as an exhibit to educate people about architect Wallace Rayfield, one of the few Black licensed architects in the nation who designed the home, the church, and other buildings in Birmingham.
We think that his work is so prominent that it should be emphasized to the youngsters that are coming on now.
And that now will serve its purpose because of the millions already spent to help keep the historic district alive.
We believe it's worth it. The price that Reverend Shuttlesworth and those who followed him paid opened up the door for us to get a lot of opportunities that we would not have had had they not sacrificed their lives.
Lives whose stories will live on beyond these historical walls. In Birmingham, Magdala Lusant, WVTM 13.
Well, art is about expression, no matter the form.
Yeah, coming up later, we introduce you to two young black artists making their voices heard through their craft.
He was probably in the mid-40s the most dominant pitcher in black baseball.
Plus, he was a black pioneer in baseball that held his own at the mound, but struggled off the field trying to navigate racism in America.
You're watching Project Community, Black Voices of Alabama. Welcome back. It's been 75 years since Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier.
As the first black player signed by a major league team, he took the field for the Brooklyn Dodgers in April of 1947. His career forever celebrated in baseball's Hall of Fame.
All but forgotten today is the only black teammate Robinson had on that Dodger team in the summer of '47. WVTM 13's Jeff Eliasoff looks at the pioneering pitcher from Central Alabama.
Dan Bankhead was born in the Walker County town of Empire, Alabama in the spring of 1920. One of 5 superb baseball-playing brothers, Dan was a true star pitcher for his hometown Birmingham Black Barons and then the Memphis Red Sox of the Negro Leagues.
Started out in 1940, was an infielder, and real quickly the team realized this guy can pitch. And so he became a pitcher.
And says historian Dr. Leighton Ravel, a darn good one.
He was probably in the mid-40s the most dominant pitcher in black baseball.
Even compared to fellow Alabamian Satchel Paige.
Satchel Paige is probably one of the greatest pitchers to ever live. Started playing in the 20s, was still pitching into the 60s. But at the end of the day, Dan Bankhead wasn't Satchel Paige. He was Dan Bankhead.
But in the summer of 1947, Dan Bankhead was at the top of his game and caught the eye of Branch Rickey, the visionary executive of the Brooklyn Dodgers.
He felt he really needed pitching and went after
Bankhead and took the opportunity to sign him.
The Dodgers were in a heated pennant race, so things went fast. Dan Bankhead was on the mound for Memphis in the Negro Leagues on August 24th and won the game. Just 2 days later, he became the first black pitcher in the major leagues, starting for the Dodgers at legendary Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. His debut was a baseball disaster. Bankhead gave up 8 runs and hit a batter in less than 4 innings, punctuated by one shining moment, a rare feat.
The only good thing to come out of that initial game was he had a home run in his first time at bat. And what a lot of people don't realize is Dan Bankhead, besides being a really good pitcher, was an excellent hitter.
But he suffered the slings and arrows, the curses and indignities of a black man trying to navigate a racist post-war America. So many problems off the field.
The biggest one that Bankhead talks about is finding accommodations for his family.
Easing the burden, a good relationship with his far more successful teammate, Jackie Robinson. Robinson's temperament and talents better suited to the constant insults, name-calling, and doubts.
They developed a very, very close friendship that lasted over the years. Did it take some of the pressure off of Jackie? Probably did. Did it take any pressure off of Dan? Most definitely not.
Bankhead was only the 5th player to go from the Negro Leagues to the Major Leagues. Bankhead's Major League career was short, winning just 20 games over 4 years. He played through pain in his arm, fearing he'd be sent to the minor leagues. And indeed, he finished his career in Mexico.
I think Dan Bankhead should be remembered for contributing to our understanding of integration in America. He was a pioneer. He was someone who endured the Negro Leagues in terms of play and uplifting his teammates and others. But had it not been for the Negro Leagues, then you don't have a place to nurture a player like Jackie Robinson. And Jackie Robinson comes along and becomes a trailblazer not only for baseball, but for American society. And Bankhead plays an important role in helping to preserve that legacy.
A legacy with echoes here at venerable Rickwood Field, where Dan Bankhead heard the cheers for his Birmingham Black Barons 80 years ago. He died at a VA hospital just 1 day before his 56th birthday, but not before he saw the game he loved create opportunities for hundreds of other players, a few managers, and a smattering of executives who looked just like him. One of the black voices of Alabama. In Birmingham, Jeff Eliasoff, WVTM 13.
Still ahead, righting wrongs through legal action, one step at a time.
I realize that I stand on the shoulders of so many people who did so much more with so much less.
Brian Stevenson's lifelong mission to fight inequality in the criminal justice system, and what piece of legislation in Washington is the first step?
I think that if they knew what they were talking about, they wouldn't dislike critical race theory.
And he wrote the book so he'd know the truth about critical race theory and why it's important. You're watching Project Community, Black Voices of Alabama.
And welcome back in. The Bureau of Injustice reports that 1 out of 3 black male babies will likely go to prison. It's something that widely acclaimed attorney Bryan Stevenson, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, says that we need a pandemic-like response to.
In part 2 of Bria Douglas' interview with him, you'll hear how Stevenson spent his 30-plus year career fighting bias in the criminal justice system.
I don't think anybody would have thought that when I was a little boy running around, he could be a lawyer one day.
But that little boy overcame his poor upbringing in a racially segregated Delaware, going on to receive a law degree from Harvard University.
And when I came out of law school in the 1980s, it was clear to me that this growing population of people being sent to jails and prisons was becoming a priority. I knew too many people who had been wrongly convicted, unfairly accused, unfairly sentenced.
4 years after graduating from Harvard Law School, Bryan Stevenson started the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery as a young attorney. According to the organization, it's helped more than 130 death row inmates win relief, reversals, or releases from prison.
Why was it important for you to start EJI in Montgomery? You're not originally from Montgomery, so why here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is a city with a really rich history. Montgomery was one of the most active slave trading spaces in America from 1848 until 1865. Thousands of enslaved people were brought here by rail, by boat. The street where this office is was one of the main portals for trafficking people. This office is on the site of a former warehouse where enslaved people were held. And if we're going to advocate for just and fair treatment of people who have been prosecuted, then there's no better place in the world to situate that advocacy than Montgomery, Alabama.
More than a century after slavery ended, we see a different form of injustice. According to the National Registry for Exonerations, more than 2,500 people were exonerated since 1989. Stevenson says for every 9 people executed, 1 person is proven innocent and released.
If someone said, 1 out of 9 flights that takes off is going to crash and everybody's going to die, we wouldn't fly. But we're tolerating this high error rate in the administration of the death penalty. When you're making the kind of mistakes that we see being made year after year across this country, it becomes unacceptable to continue executing people.
At the Equal Justice Initiative, staff receive hundreds of letters a month, primarily from poor people claiming they've been wrongfully convicted. Cases involving the death penalty in Alabama and children facing life sentences get top priority.
When we get these calls and letters, it's very, very difficult to make decisions because we can't represent everybody. We wish we could.
Stevenson won a case representing a 13-year-old sentenced to life in prison without parole in Florida.
The very definition of childhood is that you change. You change physically, you change psychologically, you change emotionally. So to impose a sentence that doesn't even imagine change is cruel.
Stevenson believes in protecting children and protecting the right to vote. As Congress currently debates passing voting rights laws, he says it's a crucial step in improving our justice system.
Prosecutors are elected, judges are elected. Most people don't know the name of the district attorney in their community. And when you don't know the name of someone, you're not going to be evaluating what they do and holding them accountable if they do things that they shouldn't be doing. There is a real urgency about eliminating any of the barriers that currently exist around voting. And I just think in our state, with our long history of denying people the kind of access that they deserve, we should be doing everything we can to make it as easy as possible for every person in this state to vote.
When people reflect on your life, what do you want them to remember you for?
I just want to make a difference for those who are vulnerable, to those who are disfavored. I believe really strongly in compassion, in kindness, and justice. And I just think if you get close to the poor, to the excluded, to those who suffer, and you multiply that proximity with hope, you can achieve things that can make a difference in the lives of people. And if I contribute to basic human rights in some small way, I'll be really honored by that legacy.
Look out next week for more from Bryan Stevenson in the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice he opened in 2018 in Montgomery. Sites that reflect our history and the work we can do to create a better future.
And people like Brian Stevenson have spent their lives fighting inequities in the courtrooms and in our prisons. The theory of studying those systemic inequalities is called critical race theory. A critical race theory went from a law school course to a mainstream political talking point, and now ultimately a showdown over what history school kids learn. Well, it turns out there's an Alabama tie. A law professor who literally wrote the book on it. He says moves to ban it are a dangerous step towards silencing some of Alabama's most diverse voices. For decades, this book, written by University of Alabama law professor Richard Delgado and his wife, Jean Stefancic, was rarely discussed anywhere except in law schools. Critical race theory dates back to the 1970s. It examines how racism is embedded in laws, rules, and procedures in U.S. social systems, leading to different outcomes based on race. Delgado, the son of a Mexican immigrant, is one of the founders and leading scholars in the field.
First 30, it was pretty tranquil, sort of a calm academic life with meetings and office hours and students and writing articles in books.
But the quiet life of an 82-year-old academic working remotely from his Seattle home ended in 2020.
It changed radically.
That's when there was a sudden backlash against his 5 decades of work.
I think that if they knew what they were talking about, they wouldn't dislike critical race theory, but would see it as an entirely useful way of trying to understand the social and legal construction of race and races in American society.
The outrage escalated, he says, after the appearance of a conservative activist on television.
Just a few days later, Trump gave a speech along very similar lines at the National Archives Museum, an hour-long speech in which he made the same wild accusations. And then just a few days later, he issued an executive order.
What came next was even more unsettling: death threats. This is just a sampling of the vicious messages he now gets on a regular basis, many of them filled with racial slurs, targeting his Mexican-American heritage. And many claim he hates white people, even though his wife, co-author and fellow Alabama professor, is white.
They have no idea what we have been teaching and analyzing and writing about, but they know that something is wrong with the world, and they figured out that we're somehow behind it.
Critical race theory is not taught in any Alabama grade schools. As a result, many efforts to ban it in the state legislature and by the State Board of Education focused on any teachings dealing with America's complex racial history.
In a state like Alabama, with its history, it's especially foolhardy. It endangers useful scholarship, and it endangers the lives of certain professors in the state and teachers in K through 12 schools.
Professor Delgado has his own theories about why so many people are railing against ideas from his book. First, there was former President Trump's re-election defeat.
I think that some of his followers were looking for a boogeyman, someone who was responsible for this shocking defeat of their beloved political figure. I think that's one. Number two has been a long time building. The demography in the country is changing, as everyone knows. In some 20 years, people of color, Latinos, Blacks, Asians, Indians, will be a slight majority. And some white folks who like things the way they were find that disconcerting.
And perhaps surprisingly, the pandemic.
With the pandemic, many of the schools closed. So the kids, young kids and little kids and teenagers, were spending a lot of time at home. And so their parents were getting familiar with them for the first time in some cases. And they were learning something about the kids' world.
And they were exposed to a version of history that included more perspectives from people of color.
The sort of history that had been taught conventionally in schools gave white folks a superior role, celebrated their exploits in setting up a new country, considerable exploits, and minimize the role of immigrants, Blacks, Mexicans, and Indians.
This was further compounded by the protests surrounding the murder of George Floyd, forcing parents to answer uncomfortable questions about race.
America is changing. It is good for democracy to hear many voices.
Setting new standards on and off the racetrack.
Coming up on Project Community, Black Voices of Alabama, how Mobile native Bubba Wallace has become the face of change in NASCAR and making history in the sport.
It's a never-ending process to continue to create positive change in our world. And
The 2022 NASCAR season is around the corner, and we're reflecting on changes in the sport over the past year. Much of that having to do with Alabama native Bubba Wallace Jr., the only African-American driver in the Cup Series. Carrie Osip takes a look at Wallace's impact on the sport, both on and off the track.
Been plenty of times where I wanted to give up, and you surround yourself with the right people, and it's moments like this that you appreciate.
A moment like this came in June 2020, when fellow drivers surrounded Bubba Wallace Jr. The racing world united in support of the Cup Series' only African-American driver after a rope apparently fashioned into a noose was found in Wallace's stall at Talladega Superspeedway. Turns out it was a pull-down rope that had been in the stall a year, from that summer to October 4th, 2021.
It brings a lot of emotion, a lot of joy to my family, fans, friends.
Wallace was once again in the spotlight at Talladega.
Let's go!
This time with this historic win.
Poetic justice, I think, is what you're speaking to.
He became the second black driver in NASCAR history to win a Cup Series race.
A lot of ups and downs. Just it's a never-ending process to continue to create positive change in our world and in our country, as we all know desperately we need it.
From speaking up about racial inequality to steering the conversation that led to NASCAR banning the Confederate flag at all events, NASCAR and Wallace are trying to drive change.
We couldn't be more proud of what he's done and the stance that he's taken.
Brandon Thompson, NASCAR's VP of Diversity and Inclusion, sees Wallace's impact.
But I don't think it can be overstated that representation matters. That's really what stands out about his, about the mark that he's left, is just that he's literally now got people in his footsteps.
Just like stepping into Wendell Scott's footsteps when he won the Cup Series in 1963. While Wallace chases down more checkered flags, he's also leading the race to a more inclusive NASCAR, including serving as a mentor for NASCAR's Drive for Diversity program that has been around since 2004, with the purpose to bring more minority and female individuals into the sport. Wallace, one of the program's graduates.
So once we get those labels put out here, then I think we've reached a milestone. So until then, got to roll up our sleeves and get to work.
Working toward a sport when speed is the only measure of a winner.
If we want racing to continue to be around, why not share it with everyone, number one? But then also, if we want it to be around, we understand very clearly where the demographic shifts are headed, right, in this country and even the world.
How much further does the sport of NASCAR and racing have to go in your mind?
I don't know if there's ever a clear answer on that, because it's something new every day that we have to deal with and overcome and accomplish. So it's just continuing to make everybody feel inclusive and showing that unity and compassion for one another, and just let everybody be themselves and enjoy who they are.
Carrie Osett, WVTM 13.
To date, Wallace is one of 5 total drivers of color within NASCAR.
Well, don't go anywhere. We have a lesson in African American culture and life through different forms of art. You're watching Project Community, Black Voices of Alabama. Art is a way to express yourself, whether it's the written word, visual art, or dance. The arts can define a culture.
Yeah, and here in Alabama, we're fortunate to have many talented black artists making their voices heard.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ashley M. Jones.
At 31 years of age, Ashley M. Jones is the youngest and the only person of color to be named Alabama's Poet Laureate. The culmination of a love that started at 7 when she recited a poem about abolitionist Harriet Tubman in front of her class.
And I stood up, dressed as Harriet Tubman, and I said, Harriet Tubman didn't take no stuff, wasn't scared of nothing neither. didn't come in this world to be no slave and wasn't going to stay one either. The language itself was so free to me. I felt connected to my Blackness in a way that I hadn't before. And so I decided that day I would start writing poetry.
Now, when she's not traveling the state in her role as poet laureate, she's teaching creative writing at the Alabama School of Fine Arts, helping the next generation find their own voice.
Art during this time can really open some eyes and bring people together as well.
Artist Willie Williams Jr. is also helping young people. He works with Birmingham City School students through the Greater Birmingham Arts Collaborative. At just 25, he may be the only Black art gallery owner in the state. He opened Studio 2500 in North Birmingham to showcase the area's rich and diverse talent.
This piece was created by a local artist named Larry Silver. He's an incredible painter. One of the things that I do as a gallery owner, as an artist, is not just create art that reflects Black culture and Black heritage, which is needed, of course, but to show in a sense that Black youth who aspire to be artists can make it as artists.
At his gallery, you can see works from people of all ages and backgrounds, including many of his own pieces.
Black culture is not a monolith. You know, Black culture has complexity, it has adversity, yet triumph. With my metal sculptures, I try to create images of people, idealized images of particularly Black people that just show a spirit of pride and spirit of dignity and ancestral power.
Besides being beautiful and evoking strong emotions, both Williams and Jones agree art is as crucial to our world today as ever.
Art is really crucial in empathy making. I think our society today, I mean, just looking at the last several years that we've lived through in America, we understand that empathy is so needed. And I found in my life that reading different perspectives and expressing myself on paper, that's what's helped me to become more empathetic. And really, it's made me, I think, a better activist, a better teacher, and a better person.
We hope you've been inspired by the voices and words and actions of these Black voices of Alabama.
Have a good night.